Trond without the D on the screen out there, I noticed, which is though for the reference I used with my name. For those of you old enough, remember the Trond movies? Yeah. Yes, so I just want to first off thank NewCrafts for actually giving me an opportunity to have a talk that is going to be purely about social sciences. Sorry to say, there's no code, there's no software, there's no hardware. It's wetware from now on. And there is a reason for that, because, and also the title indicates that, of course, is that I feel that we need to put the human back in center of what we're doing. I mean, we're fairly good at the technical stuff. I'm not saying we're perfect at it. And there's a lot of talks here who shows otherwise, that we still have something to go on when it comes to tech as well. But the social bit, I must admit, I don't feel that we have so nailed that one. So this talk is going to be about, I'm going to focus on the human part. Of course, there's a social technical, what we do are a social technical enterprise. And we try to overlap the social and the technical. And there's become a more consciousness about that, about teams, so how do they organize. You probably heard sociotechnical architecture as a term, which is a good one. But it covers some of the problems or some of the issues, but it's not the same. Because we try to, sociotechnical architecture, you try to overlap the team and the technical, so social and technical, make it overlap. But there's an inherent difference between those two. They're not the same. Then you can't actually overlap it properly without some techniques, which I'm going to get back to. So imagine that you have tech here and you're social there. Why do you think I've illustrated that in that way? Anyone want to have a guess? Come on, you system thinkers. Why is it like that? Yeah, could be a fit, yes? Yes, exactly that. Tech is closed. It's predictable, it's foreseeable. I really hope you have created an ordered technical system and not a complex one. I wish you, really hope you don't have some predictability in the tech. But the social one is open. There's no predictability in social sciences. Sorry, skipping ahead. Press the button, tech issues. So you can ask, why is that a big difference? And the difference is that we try to match an unpredictable system with an order system. And we have a very strong focus on that bit and not that bit. And that's the hard part. And you can say, why is that important? Of course, we want to be happy at work, I assume. So that is one thing. But actually, business owners should be interested in this as well, if you look at this quote from Akoff. Where you have satisfying quality of work life, you don't have to worry about quality of product, because the people that are enjoying their work will produce quality products. I don't know if he has any proof on that, but it's if it feels right? We know the opposite is true. Unhappy people, they do not produce good work. They can actually be destructive. They can ruin your company, basically, if you're bad. So let's assume that this is the case. So do we want anything? So the talk is going to be about how can we sort of get to that, where people actually feel that they have quality of work life. That's the talk. That's why I want to put the human back in. And I'm going to do that by talking once again about a theory that I'm really enjoying, which is called open system theory. So I'm going to use the evolvement of that theoretical framework as a way to sort of get into the social aspects of things, why things are the way they are. So I'm going to go through a few landmarks in those discoveries. And here's a map that we're actually going to go through. It goes back to the 1940s and sort of ends in the 90s, because this is when the paper was written. You have the link. I'm going to have a QR code later on for it. So we're going to pop into some of these landmarks and try to understand why things are the way they are. So let's start in the beginning, in the 1940s. We're talking wartime here, right? There was a social sciences experiments done in America by Levine. Kurt Levine was running it. And what they were trying to figure out was, how does people react to autocracy? So they were actually doing experiments with a group of boys. One team was sort of really controlled, like with a sort of leader that really controlled them. And there was another one that was sort of more democratic. That was trying to be more involved. And the experiment showed that so the boys that were sort of in a more autocratic, they got really dependent on the leader. So you didn't get any collaboration because they were always looking to the leaders. When you have a democratic organization or a team, they had to collaborate. So the leader was there, but they collaborated with them. So it's a very different way of doing it. They also discovered something that was really interesting in that experiment. Because one of the leaders, so to speak, one of the researchers, because the researchers were actually the leaders of the team, he or she had misunderstood what democratic meant. So they left the team on their own device. They said, if you're democratic, you fix it. And the leader left. Then they saw an effect called laissez-faire. Because the team had no idea how to do this stuff. Right? They were sort of thrown out at the deep end. They were going to fix some problems or do some work, and they had no idea of how to do it. Recognize this? I think many agile teams feels like this. Right? They were thrown at the deep end with no structure around them to help them to do the work. So this is really interesting. And they also show that the productiveness of sort of the authoritarian teams were highly dependent on the leader being there, as I said. While the democratic, they got cohesive, they got collaboration going. But laissez-faire was even worse than both of them. They really got into conflicts. And they got local leadership and all that stuff. We're going to go back to that later. So that was Kurt Lewin, 1940s. And he really inspired a few people in England, working at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. They were social scientists, sort of coming out of the wartime. They were actually called the Tavistock Clinic before that. So they were actually working with people with war issues then. But they moved into more of our social sciences afterward. And this guy, Trist, he went to do some research at some coal mines in England. Where they have tried to industrialize the industrial mining process with new techniques, new technology, this bit. But they didn't change this bit at all. Or what they actually did, they forced this bit to be aligned with that bit. So the people become an extension of the machine. So the people were there as a necessity, not because they wanted them there. If they could replace them, they would have instantly, because of industrialization was sort of going on. But it didn't work out as well as they hoped, the managers, that is. Didn't produce the effect, the effect that they assumed that all this new fancy tech would actually create, because people were really, really unhappy. So unhappy that they left. There was a lot of absenteeism, a lot of sickness. There were not called riots, but there were strikes and stuff like that, and people left for other work. Because mining is like a terrible work to begin with, and if you don't enjoy it, why should you stay? So they were brought in, and I noticed that there were some teams that actually did, some groups, or some teams rather actually, that did better than others. And they actually reorganized themselves to teams-based again. Instead of being spread around like for shifts, which they actually had introduced, because you had one shift doing one thing, the other shift doing another thing, and one shift doing the second thing. So there was a workflow. And if they didn't finish the work that they were supposed to do, all the conflicts started. So, but some of the teams, they said, let's go back to the old way of working. Let's just ignore those management guys. Let's try to fix this ourselves. And they were doing way better. So that was one of the big landmarks, was the sort of discovery of the self-organizing team. They call it the self-managing team. This was in 1951. And this is probably also the first time we see conceptually teams as a unit of work in a work environment. So when you think about teams that we talk about all the time today, it probably started back then. That's the first discovery of it, as a team, as a unit. So this was the birth of what's later known as sociotechnical system design. They noticed, so actually, because I mean, Tristan and the rest of the people from Tavistock, they were social scientists, so they tried to conceptualize what they were sort of observing. And what they saw is that the social bit had to be aligned with the technical bit. That's when that worked. And why the other teams sort of seemed to do better than the others. And then I want to go a little bit sidestep into this guy, Trond Hjorteland. He was a biologist and he sort of came up with something that's known as GST, General System Theory. And why it's called general is because it's actually considering systems as open in a way that he acknowledges there's an environment to a system. You can't just isolate the system. And he's a biologist, so of course, for him it made more sense. I mean, if you're an animal and you live in an environment, you have to interact with the environment. You wouldn't survive if not. But the environment wasn't conceptualized, it was just there. So there was some limitation to it. Or at least that's something that I discovered when I brought it into sort of the social aspects of the social systems. So this guy, Fred Emery, a very sharp system thinker, brought sort of the open system idea to the Tavistock Institute. He started there in early 50s, I think. He wasn't involved in the mining industry at all. So he sort of combined these two and tried to figure out why these teams worked, why some of the teams worked, and why the others didn't, or why the other teams did work and some of them didn't. So the social technical, he sort of went into it and to sort of conceptualize this further. But he really didn't get going with this before until they were able to do some experiments. Because doing sciences, you want to do some experimentation, and that happened when they moved to Norway, my native country. Because in Norway they had big issues with strikes, as they had in England with the coal mining. But in Norway wasn't that far ahead when it comes to industrialization. So the sort of building up the country after the war was like a new thing. They were trying to industrialize the whole thing. So people weren't used to industrial thinking at all. So everybody was at war with this. Why are you forcing me to do this and that, right? So there was a big push from the people in general, but also the government to sort of, and especially the unions actually then, to sort of democratize work. That was the sort of the goal there. So they brought in, or this guy, especially called Einar Thorsrud, he's a Norwegian by the sound of his name. He brought in Fred Emery from England because they heard about the experiments in London. Oh, sorry, in the Yorkshire coal mines, because they saw that there was something to this team stuff, and they wanted to explore that. They wanted to experiment with it. And of course, Fred Emery was more than happy to do that because that's what they were looking for, places where they could actually experiment. And also they got so much attention. I mean, it was also the project was in the Norwegian Industrial Democracy Program. In Norwegian, it's called just Collaboration Program. Because it was a collaboration between the employers agency, or what do you call it, and the unions and the government. So it was go all the way to the top. I was really, really focused on this. So they got all the attention they needed, and they got all the experiment places like that. So all the four core companies in Norway was sort of involved in this, where they tried out new ways of working. First I tried was people being representatives in the boardrooms. Didn't help much for democratization. It showed. So they quickly put that to the side, and then think, let's try this team thing that happened in the coal mines. They got wonderful results on that. People were more happy, they were produced better, there was better quality, like on all numbers, fantastic. But there's always a but, right? It didn't spread. They were doing these experiments, pilots, in the companies and in certain parts. And if you know about democratization, you know there is some people in a company that's not too happy with that. So it's quickly dissolved, and management got their hands on the things. When the experiments were done in '69, pretty much disappeared. There was some still left because they actually built some new companies or some parts of the company on the new model. They stayed for a while, but also those disappeared after a while, unfortunately. But there was one core thing they discovered in that experiment, and that was the people had intrinsic needs. They had some ideas of this from England as well, but they got conceptualized here in Norway. It's actually on the appendix on the report, so I guess I didn't consider it that important, but it has sort of stood the test of time. So people have 6 work criteria, or job criteria. Let's go through these. When you go to work, there are certain things that you want. So the intrinsic motive is not the external one, like pay and security. That has to be in place, of course, if this should work. But you have something else that makes you happy at work. And then in finally, these 6. Elbow room, You need a place at work that you feel is yours, that you have control of. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be yours, that you have some control of it. So they actually, I think they originally called it autonomy. They stopped using that word. I hope we will too at some point. Because autonomy that's a characteristic of something. It's not a thing. It's something that you get when you're in certain situations. So elbow room was the term they sort of landed on. And people want variety at work. There's a lot of focus from the HR parts of things at this point about this job enrichment and job like that you should have interesting jobs. So they have also this, that you need variety at work. You don't want to do the same thing all over again. You want to evolve. And that also means that you need learning at work. You want to learn something new. But learning is more than just new tech or new information or whatever. It's actually setting your own goals and get feedback on the work that you do. So you can adjust. So that is also learning. It's not just new information. It's actually then learning by doing kind of thing. So those are the personal ones. 3 personal ones. But also a set with social characteristics, and there are also 3. That's the meaningfulness. You should feel that your work actually leads to something that's socially useful. And then you also then see the whole product. Even if you work on certain parts, you want to feel that you see the whole thing. And you're actually involved in the whole thing in some way or another, the whole work. You also want mutual respect and support from your colleagues, and that goes, of course, both ways. And you want your work to lead something to a future. You want a career path of some sort. You don't want to be stuck at the same level all the time, if you want to call it levels, but we'll get back to that later on. So these 6 motivators, they are actually measurable, and they do that. They have done that thousands of times since they discovered these in companies all around the world. And it's a brilliant way to say, what's the state of the company at the moment? Send out a survey measuring these, and you'll see. The people at the bottom score low, usually, and it gets better and better the higher you come. And you can imagine who has the highest score. The one at the top. Because they are in control of all this. They are in the sweet spot. So if you want to have if you believe what Akoff said, you want to have good scores all around, especially at the bottom where the actual work happens. Right? Sorry, managers. The work is happening at the operative level. So that was sort of the learnings from Norway. So interesting things came out of that project, even if the companies kind of didn't go further with this. There's an interesting effect there. I don't know what, I think I have it in the notes, but I can't remember what it's called. But if you have something that's good, there's always somebody who's going to be challenged by it, because it's a change to the system. So the people closest to the system is going to restrict it. And then they're not going to be happy with it. The further you go away from it, it kind of goes back up. So in Norway, it didn't spread at all, but it spread in Sweden. Sweden was super happy about this. So SDS system design culminated in actually Volvo Kalmar, where they replaced the whole assembly line with teams. So the teams were building a car from A to Z, whole thing. The team were doing that. They didn't send it on an assembly line. Did wonderfully. It also went bankrupt at some point, though. But they did have wonderful results from that. And also people come from all over the world, even from Australia, to look at what was happening in Norway. Because it was a fascinating experiment, and they have wonderful results. So people from around the world was interesting. Even Japan. There might be a connection there to the TPS, the Toyota production system that we have probably heard of, lean and everything. Not saying that there is, but there's an indication that, yeah, they were here, or here as in Norway. So what happened next was that the 6 criteria sort of got stuck. They sort of agreed on that. But it's also, there was a 9-step model that was introduced. There was given a process of how you change a company from being like a industrialized solution to a more team-based. So they had a 9-step model. It's a huge analysis phase and all that stuff. And you needed an expert to do it, because it was so difficult. It kind of was. Doing this, like the huge analysis is difficult. At least when you come from the outside doing it, like they had to do here. So it was a considerable change, and it was an expertise level. They brought that to America, and so the SDS, if you hear that in America, it's kind of like this still over there. Something is happening, but it's still, yeah, the SDS method continues in USA. But something interesting was happening in this man's head, the system thinker. He was part of that program in Norway, and he actually was the guy behind the 9-step method. But he went back to Australia in 1979, and he started to look into this a bit more. So he's trying to conceptualize the organization designs. As I said, there was an industrialized version and there was a team-based version. What's the difference between them? There seemed to be a fundamental difference. And he even went as far as not only fundamental, it's genotypical. He said it's like a DNA switch between the two. They do not combine. Because you go from one structure that is fundamentally different from another. So the industrial one is one, and the other one is like the team collaborative, the autocratic and the democratic. And then you go back to what Kurt Lewin was discovering. They were really inspired by Kurt Lewin, by the way. All their research was based on ideas that he had, pretty much. So let's go through these, because I mean, if you haven't heard of it, you're probably going to click some. I think you're going to agree with this. It makes sense. It's not that difficult. So say if you have a set of tasks that needs to be done, WX Z, Y Z. And if you want this task done, ideally you want to get people that are really good at doing those tasks. So you get people that fit to that task, A, B, C, D. Because that means that they produce best work, right? And if you have unskilled workers, you can't have anyone doing everything. So you have to pick one, because that's easier. More cheaper to get people off the streets that doesn't have any skills they're going to train to do one thing, right? It's the mechanical way of thinking. It's a machine. People are an extension of the machine in this model. But that means that nobody there sees the whole product. They have no way of doing that, because they're only doing that own part of the thing. So you need supervision or management. Management is a necessity in this model. You can't say, oh, I hate management, get rid of them. No. If this is the model, you have to have management. There's no way around it. So management are not evil. They're doing a job. They're doing their best, because they have to in this model. And of course, there are layers of management. Oh, sorry, there was none. There's layers on there in bigger companies. So this is what he called design principle 1. This is what they saw in the industrial environment, like in the coal mines in Yorkshire, the deeper one. So there is a characterization you can use on this. What's the difference between this and the other one, which I'm going to? And it's how they deal with redundancy. Any system needs some certain level of redundancy. I mean, if A dies or hit by a bus or whatever, the system will fall apart if you can't replace that part. People are parts in this resources in this model. That's why I hate the word resources, because they're just parts. So in this model, you need more people that can replace that part. So you need more people who can do the same thing. If you can't have them in internally and pay for them, you have to get them in fast. At least like in industrial, you want to get them off the street, basically. Just give them a hammer and do what I tell you. Right? That's the basic part of it. So that's how we deal with redundancy in this one. So that's why it's so different, because the other one, you deal with redundancy in a very different manner. Here, you have a group task. Instead of saying that you break it up, just instead of division of work, like you've probably heard of, here you do the opposite. You say, this is a whole task, and we need some people to do that task, and they are a group doing it. That's the big difference. And that's what happened in those teams in England. People saying, okay, let's deal with this together. Instead of having shifts, yes, of course, they enforce the shift, but let's figure out how we can live with those shifts in a good way. And you would probably have layers there as well as you have with the management. But it's bubbles, it's teams all the way. And this is redundancy of functions. So one person can do more than one thing at any point in time. So they have knowledge to replace some of the work. To say A may still do W, but B can actually do W if A gets sick. So they can replace each other. So that means that instead of having more people, you have more knowledge in people. And what does more knowledge in people mean? You have a learning organization. Fits right. Anyway, so sidetrack there. So a good way to sort of place this is like, where do you put the responsibility for control, coordination, and goal setting? That's sort of the criteria they use to differentiate. In this one, you have to put it there. There's no one else who can do it. It's only management that are able to do it. Because people down at the floor, they can't see it even. They only see bits. And if you force them to be, you optimize your work, there's a whatever, or team in an agile way. They only see their bit, and they optimize their bits, and they can't see the rest, i.e. local optimization, which we know it's not a good idea in a system thinking way. Here, it has to go in the team. There's nobody else who can deal with it. So this was the insight that he had in the 70s after the Norwegian industrial program, Fred Emery. Yes, so Fred and the other people that actually work part of the Norwegian industrial program, they sort of they have come to the conclusion that what we learned in Norway, we did the experiments, we know what works, we have even now conceptualized it as a theory. The experimentation phase is, we have done a lot of experiments. Let's get this into the world. And also, because then all the sort of discoveries that Levine had with his team, and what Trist had with the coal mines, they sort of got conceptualized and proven why this was the way. It was proven as long as you can prove it, though. But Fred went back to Australia in '69, I think, and he still brought with him the 9-step method. But he was only him, and there was a lot of interest from companies in Australia. So he had to figure out a way so he could sort of scale himself, if you like. And the best way to scale himself, he figured out, was let people do the design themselves. So that's where the participant design comes into play. He noticed that you don't have to have if you bring in an expert, the expert is like a blank sheet. Normally, of course, they bring some knowledge. Hopefully, we do that as a consultant as well. But when you come into a new company, you know nothing about the company. I feel like lost when I come to a new client. I know nothing about you, and I have to learn so much before I can even touch the thing. So an expert needs to do a huge amount of analysis when you bring in. Anyone brought in teams from PwC or McKinsey, or they are really expensive because they have to do an enormous amount of design in order to say anything. But they have to extract that information from the people working there. So why can't the people working there do the design? That was his epiphany when he went back there. So they started something called participative design. So they even actually a structured one called participative design workshop, where people redesign themselves from DP1 to DP2. There's no expert needed, because they know it all. They know the skills that they need. They know the variance that they encounter at work. They know how they feel about work. Nobody can tell you that you're happy, aren't you? So they do the 6 criteria and all that stuff. And then they redesign, and then they can test it. No problem. Why should you bring in experts? So in America, they continue with the experts. Australia, experts gone. Yes. So this was more or less condensed into something called a participant design workshop, work and community life. They call it the Golden Book. Just 14 pages that describes how to do this. So it's not difficult. It's not like you need a university education to do this, the redesign. You can just tell people about the conceptual framework, describe it. They will intuitively get it. I mean, you got the DP2 thing, right? You get it immediately because it feels natural. It's not like it's something foreign. It's not quantum mechanics. Like it's us we're talking about. So people can do this, and just a 14-page leaflet was enough to let people do that. People are expert. They know what to do. They just need help doing it. So this was sort of summarized in a book called the Participative Design for Participative Democracy. The book is out of sale. You can get it used. I've gotten one used. But it's actually available online. So just scan that QR code. You get to that page called Social Sciences That Actually Work, which I love. So this is from the Emrys. They know that social science have some issues with reproduction and all that, right? So you get updated version of all the content in that book, actually. In the latest updates was last year, I think, so it's really up to date. But at the same time as this participant design workshop thing was going on, they were experimenting with another technique called a search conference. This was, again, Fred Emery and Eric Trist. They were working together at the Tavistock at this point. And they were actually they were this conference was brought in because there were two airline or aircraft engine manufacturers that needed to join forces because the RAF were really strict after the war. They needed efficiency, so they wanted to reduce, and there was a lot of hostility trying to merge those two. And then the search conference came about. So it's a way to deal with conflict, is the sort of start point of a search conference. I'm going to get back into what it actually is, but imagine it's a way to structure their discussions and the way to redesign themselves. That's what a search conference is. So it's a search that you do to the future. What do we want to be together, not as separate entities. And they were inspired by many sources. I go back to the 50s again. I'm not going to go through all this, but I want to focus on this one. This is from Bion. What's the search name? It's called Bion. He worked at the Tavistock Institute. He used to be a psychotherapist during the war. He was helping people who had got the shell shock, what we today call PTSD after the war. So he was the first one, as I know of. I think he was actually the first one trying to do group therapy. And doing group therapy, you're into teams again, right? So he's noticed a really interesting things here. If you keep Kurt Lewin and his experiment in mind for a little bit, you're going to recognize this. Say if you have a leader. In his case, he was the doctor, really respected. People come to you, they want help, they want the treatment. So how do people react to leadership is basically this, what he noticed. There are three things that he noticed, three ways of reacting to leadership. One is dependency. That's what I mentioned earlier. You really depend on your leader. If the leader is not there, you know, I don't know what to do, or I don't dare to do anything creative because I'm going to, right? So you listen to your leader and you follow what the leader says, big leader. But that also means that if the leader leaves, nothing happens, basically. Nobody dares to do anything. That's dependency, that's one. There's of course this one, fight, flight. I'm probably more in that category, I must admit. Not flight, but maybe the other one. Norwegian, as you said, yeah. So either you said, oh, I can't deal with this, I'm leaving, I'm absenteeism, I'm going away. That's what they saw in England in the coal mines. People were fighting conflicts, or they were just leaving. They couldn't care with this stuff. Because they actually, the dependency didn't work, because the manager was on the top, also literally on the top, on the surface, and the people doing the work was in the coal mines, so they didn't have a leader there, so a lot of fight and flights there. But there was a third. And he, being a psychotherapist, he used pairing, and he said it was between a woman and a man. But it isn't. They have recognized that this goes further. It's when you have people that sort of, if you have a leader that you don't agree with or something, you tell, okay, you and me, let's figure out to do this, right? So you get fractions within the teams doing this. So these are the sort of the three he discovered. And they match sort of what Kurt Lewin had seen, right? With a reaction to leadership and the democratic and the autocratic ways. And this, of course, matches what the DP1, DP2. But actually, the research conference was before the organization designs principles were defined. So, but they saw tendencies already back then. That there was some issues there. Thank you. So actually, I think Trist here. I forgot that. But the reactions that people have to leadership, they call BAS. Basic assumptions. For me, it's just a name. So Eric Trist, he was sort of, when they ran the conference, he was looking for that, trying to get rid of it, that people get this reaction to leadership, because they wanted a collaboration going, and then you need to get rid of the BAS, they call it. I'm going to go quick because I'm running out of time, but the conceptualization of the environment, that's another milestone, sort of a landmark, because as I said, Hjorteland, he recognized there was an open system and there was an environment, but he didn't conceptualize it. He just said it's there. That's what science always do, right? It's there. We ignore it now because we're going to have one rule. We're going to have one law. So yeah, sure, there's an environment, but it doesn't affect. We can just zero it out or something, but you can't zero out an environment. This was something that Hjorteland knew, of course. But you also see that in social systems, and there are different. So Fred Emery, he conceptualized them. He noticed that there were actually 4 types There came a fifth at some point, but 4. The first one is more a theoretical boundary condition, but let's start with the second one. That's where in an environment there is enough for everybody. You don't have to sort of fight to get to a resource or whatever. And the environment is kind of neutral. They are good or bad, but it's not tilted in either way. And it's static, it doesn't change much. And you don't have to do other things than tactics doing this. This is the placid clustered. And then I got more of a realistic one that we probably know more of. It's there's scarcity. So there's fight, you need to proceed strategic to get things. Either people or actually resources like metals or whatever. So there's competition going on, and it's dynamic because it changes all the time. That's the disturbed reactive, type 3. And then it's an interesting one, type 4, which he called turbulent. He didn't like the name, but they ended up calling it turbulent. It's similar to type 3, but it's very unpredictable. The whole world changes without you knowing. So in a social system, that can be value changes, it can be COVID, it can be, all the things that the black swan things happening. So you can't even use strategy anymore, right? Because strategy will only take you so far. And they actually also put this, placed them in sort of history, like before 1790, which is the Industrial Revolution. This was the common norm, this was the normal environment. Then Industrial Revolution happened and all the competition and all that stuff came about. We got type 3. And after the war, they see the tendency of type 4. I have to just go fast now. So just a little bit introduction to open systems. So you have the system, it's dotted line because it's not closed. An open system, illustrated this. It has to relate to its environment. It can't just acknowledge it has to relate to it, which means that it has to interact with it. You can't just close it up. Which means that the environment will change the system, whether you like it or not, and even more importantly, the system will change the environment. They actually use the definition for an environment, and environment is all the systems that the environment is an environment for. It's a tricky one, right? Environment wouldn't be there if there wasn't the systems that's creating the environment. So I have to relate to it. And there's different levels of environments. There's a closed, like the task environment, like an industry, for example. But more importantly, it's the global environment, things that happen, changes that happen in the bigger social world. Like we have working from home now. Nobody could have predicted that. That was something that we feel that. So there are changes happening with us that is not predictable. It doesn't happen in the industry, it happens globally. So this was what he did in situ. They continue to work on the search, but the search then have to relate to those changing environments. So if you do a search conference, or the people doing a search conference has to, if they're going to search for a better future, they need to relate to this different change and different type of environments they're in. And most people today are in the 4th one, not the 3rd one. So they will continue working on this, experimenting on the search conference. So what they then discovered was, if you're going to do a good search, you better be super strict that the search is done in a DP2 manner. Which means that the DP1, DP2 is not just a statical, like an organizational thing. It's in everywhere we organize ourselves. So if you want to run a search, you need to have it in DP2. If you don't have DP2, you get all the boss effects that we saw. And if you want people involved and seeing the future and seeing their own future, they need to be at the DP2 level. That's what they discovered. You have to be really, really strict about DP2. You have to avoid the boss at any cost. So, and there was also a discovery that was made by, I think this was Merrill and Emery. They saw that when you do in a system, there's also people in that system. And they have to relate with the teams that are in. And they have to relate with the environment outside. So you can't just treat the team as a basic unit, really. You have to consider the people in the team as well, right? So that means that the people themselves have to be able to do what they call adaptive planning. Instead of just saying that the environment is so-and-so, they have to relax their environment, they have to adjust, they have to figure out how to affect the environment, because they are going to affect it anyway. But how are we going to affect it? And that's what the search conference is all about, is doing that. But they also, this other bit here, they need to deal with that in a good manner. And they call it puzzle learning, because it's like if you're laying the puzzle pieces and you don't have the box, You don't have only had the puzzle pieces. You only know the first piece. You don't know what the next piece is before you lay the first piece. So that was puzzle learning. That's when you have unpredictability. That's the only way you can learn in a And the only way they saw that you can do this is by doing participative design workshop. That people have to do that themselves. You can't have an expert generalizing, abstracting, and all that stuff. They have to do it. So she coined what is called the two-step method. You have to do a search conference first to figure out what we are going to be, what we want to be, and we at the bigger we, and then you have to redesign the organization to the DP2. You run the search conference in the DP2, but you have to reorganize the organization to DP2. So that's a two-step method, as she called. And this culminated in this book, which is still available. It's really recommend to read. It's not an easy read because it's a social sciences book, but it's accessible. That must be said. Interesting, I'm just going to quick observation about these. The type 2, that's a very much a DP2 type of environment. You have a lot of groups that sort of are isolated. Like say before the Industrial Revolution, there were towns, there were town communities, there were family co-ops and all that stuff. There wasn't any management level yet. So that's where the DP2 is. This one becomes a very bureaucratic one, so it's very DP1. And what we are trying to do is sort of get back to DP2 in a way. And that's what I see Agile is trying to do. We're trying to take back the control, because the people with the expertise sits at the bottom level. They are not in management anymore. Management can't do it because it's so highly specialized. So we try to we have to maneuver, and we try to create these bubbles. And then we create what Levine saw and called laissez-faire, because it's neither or. There's no defined DP1 structure, and it's not defined DP2. DP1, DP2 is a mix. And mixed mode creates laissez-faire effects. So OST basically is about moving from that to that, using the search conference and the participative design workshop. Moving away from the DP1 into a new DP2, they call it. It's more organizational structure. So yeah, so that's the book. So we have sort of what we have covered now. It's like there are two streams there. That's the participative design workshop stream, and this is the search conference stream. And you see there's a line between them. I didn't mention that, but it's kind of given when I say the two-step method uses both of them. Right? So that was the realization that Fred and I, that Maren Emmett did, that you have to use the two. Because they did wonderful search conference, and the companies were super happy about this, and they had plans, because out of search conference you have action plans that comes out. What's the next puzzle piece that you need to lay? But when you move from a DP2 type of search conference into like a bureaucracy, thing dies. Have you been in a workshop where that happened? This is wonderful. We have great ideas. We're in retro. We have event storming or whatever. We have brilliant ideas, and let's go. Let's move on this. And you toss it over the wall to management, and something happens maybe, but it's usually the project, the committees, or whatever, and then very little happens. So in retrospect, that would be a frustration forever for me because of that. There's so little you can do to fix things. I'm not going to go into the last one because that's if you have heard of Future Search, that's a more of an agile community thing. That lays in a different thread. It's more on an HR approach. It has some inspiration from there are lines from Search Conference. So that way it's called Search, but it's actually a different beast altogether. I want to end with a quote from Marilyn, which is, I must say that Fred Emery, he died in '97, but Marilyn, he joined the open system theory group on LinkedIn the other day. I was like, whoa. And she's 84. She can't hear anything. She can barely walk. She has a bad breath, colds or whatever. She's been smoking all her life like a chimney. But that top layer is working like crisply still. So hopefully we can learn a lot from her on LinkedIn still. She hates computers and all that stuff, so it's really amazing that she is. But I think this quote says it all. I mean, when I came across that, it's like, it was a shill. It's only when the people involved work out their own designs that necessary motivation, responsibility, and commitment to effective implementation is present. It's only when, and I think that's true. We can try to send people to team building sessions and whatnot. As long as they don't do the design themselves and owning it, they're not going to be accountable for it. You're only accountable if you let yourself be accountable for something. That's not put on it. So empowerment, they need to take the power themselves. So that's participative design and all that whole open system theory thinking. So with that, I'm actually over time. So thank you very much for your attention. Hope it was useful.